The wind cut sharply through the evening air as the sun melted into the horizon, turning the sky a bruised purple. Outside a small, old-fashioned diner that smelled of warm bread and fading memories, an elderly woman stood trembling on the cracked pavement. Her thin fingers clutched the handle of a worn-out canvas bag, and tears streamed silently down her cheeks. She was deaf, unable to hear the taunting laughter echoing around her, but she could see the cruel amusement in the eyes of the young men pointing their phone cameras at her. They filmed her like she was a spectacle, an entertainment, a joke, while she mouthed words she couldn't even hear herself speak, and as she cried their laughter only grew louder. She had no way to call for help, no voice powerful enough to silence their mockery, and no one seemed to care. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and standing up for those who can't defend themselves, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to KindHeartsHub to help spread stories that remind the world what compassion truly means. Her name was Elena Briggs, a 76-year-old widow who had lived most of her life in quiet places, far from the chaos of the modern world. She had lost her hearing decades earlier due to an untreated infection, and though she had long learned how to navigate life through lip reading and soft gestures, she had never grown used to the way some people looked at her, like she was fragile, outdated, or invisible. She had come to the diner that evening, hoping to warm herself with a cup of soup after a long walk from the bus stop. Her social security check had been delayed again, and she was stretching every dollar she had. But before she could even enter the diner, she accidentally bumped into one of the young men standing outside, spilling a few loose coins from her bag. They scattered across the pavement, tiny sparks of silver rolling into the cracks of the concrete. As she bent down to gather them, the tallest of the boys sneered at her, mocking the way her hands shook. Instead of offering help, they pulled out their phones. It wasn't enough for them to be cruel. They wanted an audience for their cruelty. Elena had lived long enough to know what humiliation felt like, but something about this moment pierced deeper than anything before. Maybe it was the helplessness of not hearing what they were saying. Maybe it was the isolation of knowing she couldn't defend herself with a sharp reply or a firm tone. Or maybe it was simply the weight of a lifetime where she had carried grief after grief, losing her husband, losing her hearing, losing her stability. But in that moment, as tears blurred her vision and her hands trembled uncontrollably, she felt something inside her crack, and the boys continued filming, capturing every second of her pain. Inside the diner, the waitress named Carla saw what was happening through the window. She recognized Elena. She came in often, always ordering the cheapest item on the menu, always leaving a tiny tip she could barely afford. Carla felt a sting of anger rise in her chest, and she hurried toward the door to intervene. But before she could step outside, the soft rumbling of engines filled the street. It was faint at first, a distant growl, but it grew louder with each second. The boys didn't hear it over their laughter. Elena didn't hear it at all, but Carla heard it, and she froze. A pack of motorcycles turned the corner, large, heavy machines gleaming under the streetlights. Their riders wore dark leather jackets patched with emblems of a well-known biker group that had gained a reputation across the region, not for violence or trouble, but for stepping in whenever someone vulnerable needed help. They called themselves the Iron Guardians, a name that spoke of strength, loyalty, and protection. Nobody messed with them, not bullies, not thieves, not even gangs, and they never looked away when someone innocent was being mistreated. The motorcycles rolled to a stop in front of the diner, surrounding the boys in a semicircle. Each engine shut down one by one, creating a silence that was more intense than any roar. The boys' smirks faltered as the bikers climbed off their bikes, towering over them with steady, intimidating calm. The largest of the bikers nodded toward Elena, who stood frozen in fear and confusion, unable to hear anything but sensing the sudden shift in the air. The boys tried to back away, but the bikers didn't need to raise their voices or make any threats. Their presence alone was enough to drain the color from the bullies' faces. One of the bikers simply extended a hand toward Elena, guiding her gently away from the laughter and the flashing phone screens. What happened next wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't violent or chaotic. It was simply human, One biker retrieved her scattered coins and placed them back in her hand. Another took her canvas bag and brushed it clean. A third wrapped his own jacket around her shoulders because he noticed she was shivering in the cold. They communicated with her not through words, but through gestures. Slow, clear, respectful gestures she could understand. And when she looked into their faces, she didn't see pity. She saw dignity. She saw protection. She saw kindness that felt too rare in her world. Carla stepped out finally, tears welling in her eyes as she saw Elena being treated with a gentleness she hadn't seen in a long time. The bikers nodded at her to join them, and together they guided the elderly woman into the diner, away from the humiliation she had suffered just moments earlier. The boys tried to slip away, but the smallest of the bikers, still much larger than any of them, stopped them with a simple raised hand. They didn't scold the boys publicly. Instead, they made them delete the videos in silence, watching closely until every file was gone. The boys fled the moment they were allowed to, but something in their expressions revealed that this was a moment they wouldn't forget. The world wasn't always kind, but sometimes it had protectors. Inside the warm diner, the bikers filled the room with quiet strength. They bought Elena the warmest meal on the menu and refused to let her pay for anything. As she sat there, wrapped in the jacket of a man built like a mountain, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Real, solid, unwavering safety. Little by little, Elena's trembling stopped. She tried to explain what happened through gestures and written notes, and the bikers listened with full attention. They weren't afraid of her tears or impatient with her slow communication. They honored her story. And when she broke down from the weight of it all, they simply sat with her, forming a shield of comfort around her. When she finally stepped outside again, the night didn't feel so cold anymore. The bikers escorted her all the way home, making sure she reached her small apartment safely. They told Carla, through a note she would later show Elena, that they planned to check on her regularly. She wouldn't have to walk alone anymore, not as long as they were around. Days turned into weeks, and the story of what happened that night quietly spread across the town. People began noticing the biker group escorting Elena to the diner, to the grocery store, even to the park. Her confidence returned, her smile returned, and the world, for once, felt like a place that hadn't forgotten her. The same boys who once filmed her crying couldn't look her in the eye anymore, not because she carried shame, but because she carried dignity that outshone their immaturity. And in the end, what mattered most wasn't the fear she had felt. It was the way strangers stood up for her when she couldn't stand up for herself. It was the way kindness arrived right when cruelty thought it had won. It was the reminder that in a world full of noise she herself couldn't hear, there were still hearts loud enough to make a difference. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder of goodness, and subscribe to KindHeartsHub to help keep these stories alive. Special request. Please comment one thing you would do to make the world a kinder place.